I found my grandmother's diary 3 weeks after we buried her. And there's one line in it that I can't stop thinking about. It says, "If anything happens to me, don't let them tell you it was an accident." She wrote that 11 years before she died. My name is, well, it doesn't matter who I am. What matters is what I found in a box that was never supposed to leave her closet. My grandmother was the kind of woman everyone described the same way. Sweet, quiet. She baked on Sundays. She called me every year on my birthday, even the year she was in the hospital. She was, by every account, unremarkable in the most comforting way a person can be. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. She died in her sleep. That's what we were told. 81 years old, a bad heart, a peaceful passing. The kind of death people say is a blessing, even though nobody really means it. My mother didn't cry at the funeral. I remember thinking that was strange. My mother cries at commercials. She cried when our dog needed a haircut. But at her own mother's funeral, she stood there like a woman reading a weather report. I didn't think about it again until I was going through the house. We were splitting up her things, furniture, dishes, the usual quiet argument that happens in every family when someone dies, and everyone suddenly remembers exactly what they think they deserve. I was the one who found the box. It was in the back of her closet, behind a row of coats that still smelled like her perfume. A shoebox, taped shut, with my name written on it in her handwriting. Not my mother's name, not my aunt's name, mine. Inside was a diary, leather, worn at the corners, the kind of thing you'd buy at a drugstore in the 70s and never think twice about. I sat down on her bedroom floor and I started reading. And by the 3rd page, I understood why she gave it to me and not to anyone else in this family. Because I was the only one who never stopped asking questions. To understand what I found, you have to understand who my grandmother actually was. Not the version we all agreed on at the funeral, the real one. She grew up in a small town, married young, had 3 children by the time she was 26. My mother is the middle one. From every photograph, every home movie, every story passed down at Christmas dinner, you'd think her life was simple, uneventful. A woman who lived quietly and left quietly. But the diary didn't read like it belonged to that woman. The first entries were normal enough. Grocery lists disguised as journal entries. Complaints about my grandfather snoring. A recipe for a pie she never once made for me, which honestly still stings a little. But somewhere around 1974, the tone changes. She starts writing about a man. Not my grandfather. She never uses his full name, only a first initial, M. She writes about him in a way that made me sit up straight on that bedroom floor. Careful, guarded, like she was writing in code in case someone else ever opened this book. Then, on a page dated almost a year later, she writes something that made my stomach drop. She writes, "M came by again today. He said if I tell anyone, it won't just be me who pays for it." I read that sentence 4 times, because M wasn't a stranger. I recognized the name 2 pages later, when she finally slipped and wrote it in full. It was my grandfather's business partner. A man who, according to every family story I'd ever heard, died in a car accident in 1975. The same year my grandmother started writing about being afraid. I want to be careful here because I know how this sounds. I know grief makes people search for patterns that aren't really there. I know a diary is one person's version of the truth, filtered through fear, memory, and time. But then I found the second box. The second box was smaller, metal, not cardboard, locked. I didn't have the key, so I did what anyone would do at midnight, alone, in their dead grandmother's bedroom. I pried it open with a butter knife from her kitchen drawer. Inside were newspaper clippings, all about the same accident, the one that killed M in 1975. But here's the detail that stopped me cold. My grandmother hadn't just kept the obituary. She'd kept the original police report, the real one, not the summary that ran in the paper. And someone, in pencil, in handwriting I now recognized as hers, had circled a single line. The line said the brakes had been inspected 2 days before the crash, and they were fine. I called my mother the next morning. I didn't tell her about the diary. I just asked casually if she remembered anything about M from when she was a kid. There was a pause on the phone, a long one. Then she said, "Why are you asking about him?" Not "who's that?" Not "I don't remember." She knew exactly who I meant. I pushed a little, gently. And that's when my mother told me something that wasn't in the diary at all. She said that for months before he died, M had been coming around the house when my grandfather was at work. That my grandmother used to send my mother and her siblings outside to play whenever his car pulled into the driveway. That once, my mother had come back inside early and heard her mother crying in the kitchen. I always thought it was an affair, my mother said. I never told anyone, because what good would it do? But an affair doesn't explain a threat written in a diary. And it doesn't explain why my grandmother kept a police report for 50 years with one line circled in pencil. I went back to the diary that night and found the last entry about him. It was dated 4 days before the accident. It said only this: "I told him I was done being afraid. I don't know what that means for tomorrow, but I meant it." I spent the next 2 weeks doing something I never thought I'd do to my own grandmother's memory. I investigated her. I found the original news coverage of the crash, not the version that ran in our local paper, but a wire report picked up by a bigger outlet at the time. Buried in the 4th paragraph was a detail no one in my family ever mentioned. A witness told police they saw a second car near the scene minutes before the crash. A car that was never identified. A car that matched almost exactly the description of my grandfather's. I sat with that for a long time. Because here's what I now believe, and I want to be honest that this is belief, not proof. I think my grandmother knew something. Maybe she knew everything. And I think whatever happened on that road in 1975, it wasn't the accident everyone agreed to remember. I think she spent the rest of her life protecting a version of the truth that let her family stay whole. Let her children grow up with a father instead of visiting one in prison. Let the story stay simple because simple was survivable. And I think at the very end, she couldn't carry it alone anymore, so she wrote it down. Not to accuse anyone, not even to be believed. She left it for the one person in the family who she knew wouldn't let it go, who would ask the second question and the third instead of stopping at the first comfortable answer. She left it for me. I haven't shown my mother the diary. I don't know if I ever will. Some truths don't set anyone free. They just move the weight from one person's hands to another's. But I keep thinking about that first line. If anything happens to me, don't let them tell you it was an accident. She wasn't just talking about him. I think in her own way, she was talking about herself too. If you want to hear what happened when I finally showed this to the rest of my family, that's part 2. And trust me, it didn't go the way I expected.